Vietnam, a land of lush landscapes and rich culture, was once a small and peaceful country nestled in Southeast Asia. Yet beneath its serene surface, an intense and hidden conflict was unfolding, one that would draw the attention of the world and test the courage of countless individuals. This was a war unlike many others, fought not just on battlefields, but also in the hearts and minds of the people. It was a clash between communist insurgents, known as the Viet Cong, and the South Vietnamese forces supported by the United States. The complexity of this conflict goes far beyond the simple lines of friend and foe. The Viet Cong blended seamlessly into villages and jungles, turning ordinary farmers and neighbors into potential enemies or allies overnight. The dense jungles and vast rice paddies became silent witnesses to a battle where every step could mean life or death. For the soldiers on both sides, survival meant more than just skill with weapons. It demanded resilience, quick thinking, and unwavering determination. Behind the scenes, American troops arrived not as conquerors but as helpers, advisors, and partners. Their mission was to support South Vietnam in defending its freedom, offering modern tactics, training, and technology. Yet, the challenge was enormous. The soldiers had to navigate unfamiliar terrain, face an elusive enemy, and build trust with local communities who often lived in fear and uncertainty. It was a war where the lines blurred, and every victory required both bravery and strategy. In this story, we dive deep into the life of a soldier during the Vietnam War, a life filled with hardship, brotherhood, and sacrifice. We will explore how these men faced the dangers of guerrilla warfare, adapted to harsh environments, and found moments of humanity amidst chaos. Through real-life accounts, tactical insights, and a look at the broader impact on Vietnamese society, we aim to paint a vivid picture of what it truly meant to live and fight in this turbulent time. If you are fascinated by history, eager to understand the realities behind the headlines, or simply want to hear the untold stories of those who lived through one of the most challenging conflicts of the 20th century, this video is for you. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth stories, analysis, and historical insights. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join us as we uncover the truth behind the uniforms and helmets, behind the jungle and smoke, and discover the human side of war in Vietnam. Your support helps us bring these stories to light. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. As the conflict in Vietnam escalated, the role of the United States grew far beyond a simple military presence. It was a commitment that intertwined political resolve, economic investment, psychological strategy, and military support in a delicate balance aimed at preserving the fragile government of South Vietnam. The American involvement was not merely about sending troops or weapons. It was about building a partnership with a nation struggling to define its future amid the shadow of communism. This multifaceted approach was designed to strengthen South Vietnam not only on the battlefield but in the hearts and minds of its people. Recognizing that winning a war required more than firepower, it required winning trust, stability, and hope. From the early stages, American advisors worked closely with South Vietnamese leaders, helping to shape policies and governance structures that could withstand internal divisions and external threats. This political backing was crucial in presenting a united front against the communist insurgency. Yet it was an enormous challenge, as Vietnam was a land of deep-rooted traditions, diverse cultures, and complex loyalties. To support these efforts, the United States provided extensive economic aid aimed at rebuilding infrastructure, improving education, and creating opportunities for communities ravaged by decades of turmoil. Roads, schools, hospitals each represented a step toward a future that the war threatened to erase. However, the battlefield was never far from these efforts. The U.S. military's involvement was comprehensive, incorporating advanced weaponry, training programs, and strategic planning that sought to adapt modern warfare techniques to the unique and unforgiving terrain of Vietnam. The dense jungles, sprawling rice paddies, and winding rivers posed formidable obstacles, but they also demanded innovation. Helicopters became lifelines, moving troops swiftly through the jungle canopy and providing crucial support where ground movement was impossible. Air support, artillery, and riverine forces worked in harmony to create a network of power projection that aimed to counter the elusive tactics of the Viet Cong. Yet, war is never won by weapons alone. Recognizing this, psychological operations were launched to undermine the enemy's influence and build confidence among the South Vietnamese population. Leaflets, broadcasts, and community programs were designed to communicate that the war was not only fought with guns, but with ideas, and that the future belonged to those who chose freedom and cooperation over fear and oppression. These efforts aimed to reduce the appeal of communist ideology, encouraging villagers to resist coercion and support government forces. One of the most critical components of this vast support system was the presence of American special forces and advisors who lived alongside South Vietnamese soldiers and villagers. Their mission went beyond training and tactics. They became mentors, mediators, and symbols of solidarity. They taught local forces how to defend their homes, sharing knowledge about weapons, combat techniques, and village security that were tailored to counter guerrilla warfare. This hands-on approach helped transform isolated communities into strategic strongholds that could withstand attacks and resist infiltration. The Strategic Hamlet program is a prime example of this integration between military and civilian efforts. Villages were consolidated into defensible areas with fences, guard posts, and rapid response units, reducing Viet Cong access to food, information, and recruits. While this initiative faced criticism and challenges, it represented an innovative attempt to create safe zones that combined security with civic support, reflecting the understanding that military success depended on civilian cooperation and well-being. Despite the complexity of this involvement, the U.S. military never lost sight of the human element. Soldiers on both sides endured harsh conditions, but the Americans strove to provide their South Vietnamese partners with the tools, training, and support needed to survive and prevail. This partnership extended to medical teams offering care in remote villages, engineers rebuilding critical infrastructure, and psychological experts working to maintain morale and counter propaganda. Together, these layers of assistance formed a comprehensive approach that sought not only to fight a war, but to build a resilient nation. This comprehensive support was a testament to the immense challenges faced by all involved. The Vietnamese people found themselves at the crossroads of history, their fate tied to the outcome of a war that was as much about ideology as territory. For the American military, it was a test of adaptability and resolve, a mission that required blending cutting-edge technology with age-old lessons of patience and trust. The story of this supported successes, setbacks, and sacrifices is a vital chapter in understanding the broader narrative of the Vietnam War. In the end, the U.S. role in Vietnam was a complex tapestry woven from military might, political ambition, economic aid, and psychological warfare. It was a struggle to create stability in a land torn apart by conflict and uncertainty. The legacy of this involvement continues to shape how we view war, partnership, and the pursuit of peace in a world where battles are fought on many fronts beyond the battlefield. In the thick of Vietnam's dense jungles and scattered villages, a quiet but powerful force was at work: American Special Forces, not just as warriors but as teachers, mentors, and partners to the local people who found themselves caught in the crossfire of a relentless war. These special forces teams understood that winning this conflict required more than just superior firepower. It demanded empowering the very communities under threat to stand up and defend their own homes. The strategy was both simple and profound. Equip villagers with the skills, knowledge, and confidence needed to protect themselves from the ever-present danger of Viet Cong attacks. The journey began in remote mountain villages, places where the people had lived for generations, often untouched by the wider world, but suddenly thrust into a war they had neither started nor wanted. These villages, frequently the Raw Day and other ethnic groups, were vulnerable, living in fear of communist guerrillas who roamed freely, demanding food, shelter, and sometimes even the lives of young men for their cause. Their homes became battlegrounds, and their lives a daily struggle for survival. Recognizing this vulnerability, American Special Forces advisors arrived with a mission that extended beyond combat, to teach self-reliance and defense in the face of overwhelming odds. Building village defenses was a task that required both ingenuity and cooperation. Fences, often made from barbed wire or sharpened stakes, were constructed around communities to create a clear boundary, one that could be guarded vigilantly. The villagers learned how to establish watch rotations that ensured 24-hour security, with volunteers taking turns to stand guard, ready to raise the alarm at the first sign of danger. It was a system born of necessity, a shield forged by the people themselves, and under the guidance of their American mentors. This approach did not just create physical barriers, but fostered a sense of unity and purpose that had been eroded by years of fear and oppression. The Special Forces did not just stop at physical defense. They immersed themselves in the daily lives of the villagers, understanding their customs, earning their trust, and tailoring training to their specific needs and environment. They introduced local forces to makeshift but effective weapons and taught tactics adapted to guerrilla warfare, blending traditional knowledge with modern military techniques. Lessons in discipline, teamwork, and vigilance were paramount, for the enemy was cunning, capable of striking silently and disappearing just as quickly. Every detail mattered, from how to carry a weapon ready at all times to how to respond instantly to signals or alarms. The training was intense and continuous, with American advisors often acting as both instructors and comrades in the harsh conditions. One of the most remarkable aspects of this partnership was the rise of self-defense forces villagers who volunteered to guard their communities, fully aware of the risks but motivated by the desire to protect their families and way of life. These local defenders became a crucial element in the broader counterinsurgency strategy, transforming passive victims into active participants in their own survival. Their knowledge of the terrain, combined with new skills, made them formidable adversaries to the Viet Cong, who found fewer places to hide and less support among the populace. This shift was a turning point, signaling a change in the dynamic of the war that relied heavily on controlling hearts and minds as much as territory. The impact of these efforts was felt far beyond the village fences. As communities became more secure, they could resume daily activities with a renewed sense of hope and stability. Farmers could tend to their crops without constant fear. Children could attend school, and markets could operate more freely. This restoration of normalcy was a silent victory, one that strengthened the social fabric and weakened the insurgency's grip on rural Vietnam. The Special Forces' work was, in many, a war of patience and perseverance, fought not just with rifles but with compassion, respect, and the belief that the people themselves held the key to lasting peace. This story of empowerment is a vital chapter in understanding the complex nature of the Vietnam War. It reveals the human side of conflict, where success depended on relationships forged in difficult circumstances and the courage of ordinary people rising to extraordinary challenges. American Special Forces and Vietnamese villagers together created a legacy of resilience and determination, showing that even in the darkest times, communities could find strength within themselves and each other. Through these combined efforts, the war was not just a series of battles fought by distant armies, but a deeply personal struggle for survival and dignity. It is a reminder that behind every conflict are individuals and communities striving to protect what matters most. A lesson that echoes far beyond the jungles of Vietnam and resonates in the ongoing pursuit of peace around the world. In the rugged landscapes of Vietnam, where dense jungles met sprawling rice paddies, the fight for survival extended far beyond the battlefield into the very heart of leadership and discipline within the South Vietnamese forces. Understanding that the strength of any army lies not just in weapons or numbers, but in the cohesion, training, and resolve of its soldiers, American advisors took on a vital role to cultivate leadership and instill discipline that could stand firm against the relentless pressures of guerrilla warfare. This was a mission that demanded patience, cultural sensitivity, and a deep respect for the Vietnamese spirit. The American advisors recognized early on that the success of their efforts depended largely on empowering Vietnamese leaders to take charge of their own defense and security. It was not enough to provide arms and tactics. The Vietnamese commanders needed to embody the qualities of effective leadership: decisiveness, adaptability, and the ability to inspire their men under the harshest conditions. Training programs were designed to strengthen these qualities, blending modern military doctrine with an understanding of local customs and traditions that shaped how Vietnamese soldiers thought and fought. Leadership training became a cornerstone of the collaboration, with Vietnamese officers and non-commissioned officers and COs learning to organize, motivate, and lead their units with confidence. American instructors worked closely alongside them, often sharing bivouac camps, participating in patrols, and demonstrating by example the discipline and tactics required to counter an elusive enemy. The relationship was one of mutual respect, where the Vietnamese brought intimate knowledge of the terrain and culture, while the Americans contributed expertise in strategy, weapons handling, and modern warfare techniques. The discipline taught went beyond drill and ceremony. It was about fostering a mindset prepared for the unpredictable challenges of jungle combat. Soldiers were trained to operate as cohesive units, with clear communication, coordinated movements, and the ability to maintain composure under fire. Emphasis was placed on situational awareness, vigilance, and rapid response to threats, as the Viet Cong's guerrilla tactics demanded constant alertness and adaptability. The training also stressed the importance of maintaining weapons in combat-ready condition and mastering a variety of arms, some supplied by the Americans, others adapted from local materials, ensuring that every soldier could respond effectively when the moment came. Tactics taught by American advisors were carefully tailored to the unique conditions of Vietnam. Jungle warfare required stealth, ambush techniques, and knowledge of how to exploit the terrain to gain advantage. Vietnamese troops learned to use hit-and-run tactics, coordinated patrols, and counterinsurgency methods that could disrupt enemy supply lines and deny them safe havens. These lessons were crucial in transforming what might have been disorganized resistance into a professional and effective fighting force capable of standing against the Viet Cong's cunning and determination. One of the most significant aspects of this training was the emphasis on leadership at every level, from village self-defense militias to regular army units. The American advisors encouraged Vietnamese leaders to take ownership of their missions, to develop their own strategies, and to lead by example. This empowerment created a ripple effect, inspiring confidence and morale among the troops, who saw their commanders not just as distant figures, but as capable leaders who understood their struggles and shared their risks. The presence of American advisors was not intrusive but supportive, often conducted through interpreters and built on personal relationships. Many Special Forces soldiers learned Vietnamese to communicate directly, deepening trust and enhancing the effectiveness of training. The day-to-day interactions between advisors and Vietnamese leaders fostered a partnership that transcended language and cultural barriers, united by a common goal of securing their homeland from insurgency. Discipline was also instilled through rigorous training exercises and real-world missions that tested the soldiers' skills and resolve. These experiences honed their ability to operate under stress, manage limited resources, and execute complex operations with precision. Over time, many Vietnamese units evolved into highly skilled formations, capable of undertaking reconnaissance, ambushes, and coordinated attacks with a professionalism that reflected the quality of their leadership. Beyond the battlefield, this emphasis on leadership and discipline had broader implications. It contributed to the building of a national identity rooted in resilience and self-determination, countering the narrative of helplessness that the Viet Cong sought to impose. The training programs highlighted that the fight was not just military but moral and psychological, empowering Vietnamese forces to protect their communities and assert control over their future. In reflecting on this period, it becomes clear that the partnership between American advisors and Vietnamese leaders was a critical factor in the overall war effort. It was a collaboration marked by challenges and setbacks, but also by moments of profound growth and achievement. The lessons learned in leadership and discipline helped shape the trajectory of the conflict and left a lasting impact on those who served. Ultimately, this story reveals that warfare is as much about people as it is about strategy and weaponry. The determination of Vietnamese leaders to rise to the occasion, supported by dedicated American advisors, illustrates the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. It is a testament to the power of leadership, training, and mutual respect in forging a force capable of confronting one of the most complex and difficult wars of the 20th century. In the heart of the Vietnam War, amid the chaos of battles and the uncertainty of shifting front lines, another kind of mission quietly unfolded, one that sought to win the hearts and minds of the people caught in the crossfire. These were the civic action programs, initiatives designed not merely to fight an enemy but to build trust, improve lives, and create bonds between soldiers and the villagers they aimed to protect. Far from the dramatic explosions and gunfire, this softer approach was vital in shaping the course of the conflict. Recognizing that military success depended heavily on the support and goodwill of local communities, the relationship between soldiers and villagers was complicated, shaped by years of fear, suspicion, and hardship. Many villagers lived under constant threat from the Viet Cong, forced to provide food and shelter to insurgents or face brutal consequences. This created a climate of distrust toward any armed forces, including those sent to defend them. American and South Vietnamese soldiers understood that to break this cycle, they needed more than just weapons and patrols. They needed to become trusted partners and helpers in the eyes of the people. Civic action programs were born out of this necessity, combining military presence with humanitarian efforts to demonstrate genuine care and commitment. Medical aid became a cornerstone of these programs. Teams of specially trained medics and doctors often traveled to remote villages where access to healthcare was limited or non-existent. They brought medicines, vaccinations, and treatments for common ailments, setting up clinics in schools, temples, or even open fields. For villagers who had rarely seen a doctor, this medical outreach was transformative. It brought relief to the sick and injured, reduced the spread of disease, and offered a glimpse of hope amid the war's destruction. The presence of medical teams also softened the image of soldiers, transforming them from faceless enforcers into compassionate caregivers. The impact of medical aid went beyond immediate health benefits. It created opportunities for dialogue and understanding, allowing soldiers to connect with villagers on a personal level. Smiles, laughter, and shared moments of relief helped bridge the cultural and linguistic gaps that often separated the two groups. These interactions built trust and opened doors to cooperation, enabling villagers to share valuable information about enemy movements and threats. In a conflict where intelligence was crucial, such goodwill became a powerful tool against the Viet Cong. Civic action programs extended further, encompassing efforts to improve infrastructure, education, and daily life. Soldiers assisted in building schools, repairing roads, and digging wells, addressing the basic needs that had long been neglected in rural Vietnam. These projects symbolized a commitment to a better future and a rejection of the destruction wrought by insurgency. They fostered a sense of community resilience and pride, reinforcing the idea that the government and its allies were invested in the well-being of the people, not just in military victory. The presence of soldiers working alongside villagers in these projects also changed perceptions. Rather than distant outsiders, they became visible participants in community life, sharing the burdens and hopes of those they served. This hands-on involvement helped erode the traditional distrust between rural populations and armed forces, creating relationships based on respect and mutual benefit. It was a subtle but profound shift, one that required patience and consistency, but held the promise of lasting peace. Psychological operations intertwined with these civic efforts, aiming to counteract the influence of the Viet Cong by promoting messages of unity, hope, and resistance to insurgent coercion. Leaflets, radio broadcasts, and community meetings reinforced the themes of cooperation and national pride, encouraging villagers to reject violence and support legitimate authorities. These campaigns complemented the tangible benefits of medical and infrastructure aid, shaping attitudes and morale in ways that pure military force could not. The challenges were immense. The war was unpredictable, and villages were often caught in the crossfire or targeted by insurgents seeking to undermine government influence. Civilians lived in constant fear, and the threat of reprisals made cooperation risky. Despite these dangers, many villagers embraced the civic programs, recognizing that collaboration offered a path to safety and stability. Their courage and willingness to engage were essential to the success of these initiatives. American and South Vietnamese soldiers involved in civic action programs often faced their own struggles. Balancing combat duties with community work, they adapted to harsh environments, learned local customs, and overcame language barriers to fulfill their roles as protectors and helpers. Their efforts embodied a holistic vision of security, one that integrated military strength with social support and human connection. Looking back, the story of civic action programs during the Vietnam War reveals a dimension of the conflict that is sometimes overlooked: the battle for legitimacy and trust. These programs highlighted that winning a war is not solely about defeating an enemy on the battlefield, but about earning the loyalty and confidence of the people whose lives are most affected. They remind us that compassion, service, and solidarity are powerful forces in the pursuit of peace. Through medical aid, infrastructure projects, and heartfelt engagement, soldiers and villagers forged bonds that transcended the violence surrounding them. This shared humanity offered a glimmer of hope amid the war's darkest moments and left a lasting legacy of resilience and cooperation. It is a story of how, even in the midst of conflict, kindness and commitment can create foundations for a better tomorrow. In the midst of the complex and brutal conflict that was the Vietnam War, a unique and ambitious strategy emerged: the Strategic Hamlet Program, a bold effort to reshape the very fabric of rural life in South Vietnam in the name of security and resistance against the Viet Cong insurgency. This program sought to transform scattered, vulnerable villages into consolidated, fortified communities capable of standing strong against guerrilla attacks, effectively cutting off the Viet Cong's ability to blend into the local population and maintain their influence. It was an experiment in social engineering and military strategy that underscored the deep connection between civilian life and warfare in Vietnam. The idea behind the Strategic Hamlet program was born from the urgent need to protect innocent villagers who found themselves trapped in the crossfire of a war they neither started nor desired. These rural communities, often isolated and poorly defended, had become easy prey for Viet Cong forces who relied on stealth, local support, and the cover of familiar surroundings to carry out their operations. The Viet Cong could move freely through rice paddies, jungles, and hamlets, drawing supplies and intelligence from sympathetic or coerced villagers. Breaking this cycle required not just military action, but a reimagining of how villages could exist securely within a war zone. At its the Strategic Hamlet program aimed to consolidate several smaller villages and hamlets into a single defensible settlement, often relocated and rebuilt with new fortifications such as stockades, trenches, and watchtowers. These fortified hamlets were designed to be self-sufficient and resilient, with villagers trained and equipped to guard their homes around the clock. The program brought American advisors, South Vietnamese officials, and local leaders together to coordinate the construction, defense, and governance of these new communities, blending military planning with social organization. The process was neither simple nor easy. Many villagers were asked to leave their ancestral homes, lands, and traditions to move into these newly created hamlets, often built with unfamiliar layouts and surrounded by barriers that both protected and confined them. This relocation sparked tension and resistance, as it disrupted long-standing social structures and relationships with the land. However, the promise of security and the protection against Viet Cong intimidation convinced many to embrace the change. Within the walls of the strategic hamlets, families found a measure of safety that had been elusive in the open countryside. One of the defining features of the strategic hamlet was its organized defense system. Villagers, including men and sometimes women, volunteered or were enlisted into self-defense forces tasked with constant vigilance. Drums, whistles, or horns were used as alarms to summon defenders at the first hint of an enemy approach. Every household had an assigned role, some responsible for lookout duties, others prepared to take up arms if the Viet Cong dared to attack. This 24-hour security was essential in deterring guerrilla raids, making it costly and dangerous for insurgents to operate in these areas. The program also aimed to integrate civic improvements, ensuring that the strategic hamlets were not just military strongholds but livable, thriving communities. Infrastructure such as wells, schools, clinics, and marketplaces were developed, improving the quality of life and fostering a sense of normalcy amid wartime chaos. These enhancements were designed to win the trust of the villagers and demonstrate the government's commitment to their well-being, contrasting sharply with the fear and repression often associated with Viet Cong presence. American special forces and other military advisors played a crucial role in training the villagers, helping them build defenses, organize patrols, and master weapons skills necessary to stand against an enemy that was both elusive and relentless. Advisors worked tirelessly to adapt tactics to the unique challenges of each hamlet, ensuring that defenses took full advantage of the terrain and local knowledge. The strategic hamlet was a fusion of military science and community spirit, relying on the courage and cooperation of the villagers themselves. While the program showed promise in several areas, it was not without significant challenges and controversies. Relocation bred resentment among some villagers who felt uprooted and controlled, while the Viet Cong exploited these tensions to fuel anti-government sentiment. The fortified hamlets sometimes became targets for fierce attacks, testing the limits of their defenses and the resolve of their defenders. Maintaining morale and ensuring fair governance within the hamlets required constant effort from both local leaders and external advisors. Despite these hurdles, the Strategic Hamlet program represented a vital attempt to address the fundamental problem of civilian security in a guerrilla war. It highlighted the reality that victory in Vietnam could not be won by military might alone, but required securing the loyalty and safety of the people whose lives were most directly impacted. The program sought to create pockets of stability and resistance, denying the enemy the shelter and support that had long allowed the insurgency to persist. This chapter of the Vietnam War story reflects the complexities of counterinsurgency warfare, where battles are fought not only with bullets but with policies, community organization, and psychological strategy. The strategic Hamlet program serves as a reminder that in such conflicts, the lines between civilian and combatant blur, and success depends as much on protecting and empowering communities as on defeating enemy forces. In the end, the strategic Hamlet was more than a military tactic. It was an attempt to weave security and hope into the daily lives of villagers caught in the storm of war. It embodied the belief that through unity, vigilance, and cooperation, even the smallest communities could become bastions of resilience and defiance against the shadowy threats lurking just beyond their walls. In the dense jungles and winding riverways of Vietnam, where the line between friend and foe was often blurred, the fight against the Viet Cong demanded relentless vigilance and constant action. The South Vietnamese troops, trained and supported by American advisors, took on the arduous task of rooting out the elusive guerrilla fighters who had mastered the art of blending into the landscape and local populations. These troops embarked on frequent raids and patrols, stepping into the shadows of enemy strongholds, where danger lurked in every corner and the unexpected was the only certainty. The Americans, while providing guidance, intelligence, and strategic support, rarely took part in direct combat, emphasizing their role as mentors and enablers rather than front-line fighters. These patrols and raids were far from routine. Each mission was a calculated risk, a delicate balance between aggression and caution. The Vietnamese soldiers moved with purpose, trained to read the terrain, listen for subtle signs of enemy presence, and respond swiftly to ambushes or booby traps. Their knowledge of local languages, customs, and geography gave them an edge that was indispensable in navigating the complexities of jungle warfare. Yet, the Viet Cong were formidable adversaries, experts in hit-and-run tactics and guerrilla ambushes that demanded constant alertness and adaptability. American advisors, often embedded with Vietnamese units, brought a wealth of experience and modern military tactics honed from decades of training and combat. Their role was multifaceted. They offered real-time advice during operations, helped coordinate air and artillery support, and ensured communication lines remained open, though they stepped back from direct firefights unless absolutely necessary. Their presence was a source of confidence and strategic advantage for the Vietnamese troops. This partnership was built on trust and mutual respect, blending local expertise with advanced technology and strategy. The raids often targeted Viet Cong base camps, supply caches, and tunnel networks, hidden labyrinths that served as nerve centers for the insurgency. These operations required meticulous planning and coordination, sometimes involving helicopter insertions, riverine assaults, and night patrols to catch the enemy off guard. Vietnamese troops faced daunting challenges, from navigating treacherous terrain to enduring harsh weather and the ever-present threat of surprise attacks. The jungle seemed alive with danger, concealing hidden traps, sniper fire, and sudden bursts of violence. One of the most harrowing aspects of these missions was the constant threat posed by booby traps and mines, crude yet deadly devices designed to maim or kill. Soldiers learned to move cautiously, scanning the undergrowth and using probing tools to detect hidden dangers. The experience was mentally taxing, with every step potentially triggering an explosion. Despite the dangers, the determination of the Vietnamese troops to reclaim their land and protect their communities propelled them forward. Their courage was matched by their skill, as they adapted to the guerrilla tactics and learned to anticipate enemy moves. The presence of American advisors brought not only tactical expertise, but also access to superior firepower and technology. Coordinated airstrikes, artillery barrages, and naval gunfire were often called in to support ground operations, softening enemy positions before troops advanced. These combined arms efforts showcased the synergy between Vietnamese bravery and American resources, amplifying the effectiveness of each raid. The advisors also played a key role in extracting wounded soldiers and coordinating medical evacuations, ensuring that casualties received timely care despite the remote and hostile environments. Patrols were not merely military maneuvers, but also intelligence-gathering missions. Vietnamese soldiers engaged with local villagers when possible, seeking information about Viet Cong movements and sympathizers. Winning the trust of civilians was crucial to disrupting the insurgency support network. These interactions were delicate, as villagers often feared reprisals from both sides. Soldiers had to balance assertiveness with respect, demonstrating that they were protectors rather than oppressors. This approach complemented the civic action programs, creating a comprehensive strategy that blended military pressure with community engagement. The intensity and frequency of these raids underscored the relentless nature of the conflict. The Viet Cong rarely stayed in one place for long, slipping through the jungle like shadows and striking where least expected. Vietnamese troops had to be perpetually ready to move, fight, and regroup. This constant state of alertness took a toll on morale and physical endurance, but it also forged resilient, battle-hardened soldiers who understood the stakes of their mission. Their efforts disrupted enemy operations, captured weapons and supplies, and weakened the insurgency's foothold in contested areas. Throughout these operations, American advisors maintained their role as facilitators rather than direct combatants, embodying the philosophy that the war had to be fought and won by the Vietnamese people themselves. This approach aimed to build a sustainable defense force capable of independent action, reducing reliance on foreign troops. Advisors provided training in small unit tactics, jungle survival, and counterinsurgency methods, equipping Vietnamese soldiers with the skills needed to outmaneuver their adversaries. The evolving partnership reflected a recognition that true victory lay in empowering local forces to take control of their own security. As the war dragged on, the cycle of raids and counter-raids became a grim rhythm, punctuated by moments of intense combat and periods of tense calm. Each successful operation chipped away at the Viet Cong's strength, but the enemy's resilience ensured that the fight would continue. The Vietnamese troops, bolstered by American guidance and support, persevered through fatigue, loss, and uncertainty, driven by a commitment to defend their homeland and communities. This chapter in the Vietnam War story highlights the complex interplay between mentorship, local initiative, and military strategy. It reveals how the collaboration between American advisors and Vietnamese troops shaped the dynamic and often brutal nature of jungle warfare. The frequent raids and patrols were not just acts of aggression, but essential components of a broader campaign to reclaim territory, protect civilians, and undermine a deeply entrenched insurgency. In the end, these missions illustrate the courage and adaptability of Vietnamese soldiers who, supported but not overshadowed by their American allies, faced an enemy that was as cunning as it was determined. Their stories remind us that warfare is not only about battles won, but about the resilience and determination of people striving to secure peace and stability in the most challenging of circumstances. In the tangled and turbulent landscape of the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong emerged as a complex and multifaceted force, composed of individuals with a range of motivations and backgrounds that reflected the deep divisions and difficult choices faced by the Vietnamese people. While some fighters were steadfast and ideologically committed communists, willing to endure hardship and risk death for their beliefs, others found themselves drawn into the conflict through coercion, necessity, or a lack of viable alternatives. The story of a young raid tribesman who deserted the Viet Cong provides a poignant window into the human side of this struggle, revealing the complex realities behind the labels of enemy and combatant. The Viet, formerly known as the National Liberation Front, represented a mixture of hardened revolutionaries and reluctant recruits. For many, the cause was genuine and deeply held a belief in communism and the desire to unify Vietnam under a government free from foreign influence and corruption. These dedicated fighters were often willing to sacrifice everything. Driven by a vision of a new Vietnam shaped by their ideology, their commitment made them formidable adversaries. Skilled in guerrilla tactics and highly motivated to resist South Vietnamese and American forces. They operated with a sense of purpose that transcended the hardships they faced in jungle camps and hidden tunnels. Yet, beyond these committed ideologues were countless others whose involvement was far more ambiguous. Rural peasants, ethnic minorities, and young men in remote regions often had little choice but to join or cooperate with the Viet Cong. The insurgents exerted pressure through intimidation, threats, and violence, creating an atmosphere where refusal could mean brutal consequences for themselves or their families. For many, survival necessitated compliance, a tragic reality of living in a war zone where neutrality was impossible. These individuals were caught between conflicting forces, their allegiance shaped by fear as much as by conviction. The story of the young raid tribesman exemplifies this complex dynamic. Belonging to an indigenous group in the Central Highlands, the raid people had their own distinct culture and history, often marginalized by the dominant Vietnamese government and caught in the crossfire of the war. This young man had joined the Viet Cong for reasons that were not rooted in ideological zeal, but rather in circumstances that left him little room to choose otherwise. His brief tenure with the insurgents exposed him to a harsh and unyielding way of life that clashed with his hopes for his community's future. After 2 months with the Viet Cong, he made the courageous decision to desert, seeking protection from American special forces who were working to support local populations and undermine the insurgency. His defection was not simply an act of escape, but a statement of his desire to work toward a better life for his people, free from the coercion and violence that had marked his experience. His story underscores the human cost of the war and challenges simplistic narratives that paint all Viet Cong fighters with the same brush. The presence of such individuals highlighted the blurred lines that often defined the conflict. The Viet Cong was not a monolith but a patchwork of motivations and loyalties, with some fighters fully committed to communist revolution and others swept up in the tides of violence and necessity. This reality complicated efforts by South Vietnamese and American forces to distinguish friend from foe, a challenge that shaped much of the counterinsurgency strategy. Winning the support of local populations became critical, as hearts and minds could tilt the balance in a war where every village and every individual mattered. American Special Forces, in particular, sought to exploit these divisions by offering protection and support to those who deserted the Viet Cong or resisted recruitment. Their work went beyond direct combat to include outreach programs that aimed to build trust, provide security, and help rebuild communities torn apart by war. The young raid man's decision to seek refuge with special forces was a testament to the effectiveness of these efforts, showing how individual choices could ripple outward to influence broader dynamics on the ground. This story also reveals the intersection of ethnic identity and political conflict in Vietnam. Indigenous groups like the raid often found themselves marginalized by all sides, their lands and lives disrupted by the struggle between North and South Vietnam. Their involvement in the war was shaped by complex factors including historical grievances, economic hardship, and the desire to protect their cultural heritage. For many in these communities, the war was not just a battle between competing governments but a fight for survival and autonomy. The experiences of deserters and reluctant fighters added layers of complexity to the conflict. forcing military planners and policymakers to recognize that success depended on more than just defeating an enemy army. It required understanding the social fabric of Vietnam and addressing the root causes that led people to join the insurgency. Programs aimed at improving living conditions, offering medical aid, and building trust with villagers were critical components of this approach, complementing the military operations conducted in the jungles and villages. The young raid tribesman's story is a reminder that war is not simply a clash of armies, but a human tragedy filled with individual choices, sacrifices, and hopes. His desertion challenges us to see beyond the battlefield and consider the lives affected by conflict, the moral dilemmas faced by those caught in the middle, and the possibilities for redemption and change even in the darkest times. It is a story that adds depth and nuance to our understanding of the Vietnam War, highlighting the need for empathy and insight when examining one of the most complex conflicts of the 20th century. In telling this story, we are reminded that history is made not only by generals and politicians, but also by ordinary people whose lives are shaped by forces beyond their control. Their voices and experiences enrich our understanding of war and peace, illuminating the struggles and resilience that define the human spirit in times of turmoil. Amidst the challenging terrain of Vietnam's dense jungles and winding rivers, the Vietnamese Rangers and Special Forces emerged as elite units equipped with advanced training, modern tactics, and weapons that gave them a crucial edge in countering the elusive guerrilla warfare practiced by the Viet Cong. These soldiers, forged in a crucible of relentless combat and relentless training, became the spearhead of South Vietnam's efforts to regain control over their land, blending traditional bravery with cutting-edge military strategies introduced by their American advisors. The journey of these Rangers and Special Forces began long before they set foot on the battlefield. It was a rigorous process of transformation where raw recruits and local fighters were shaped into disciplined, highly skilled soldiers, drawing on expertise developed at places like Fort Bragg in the United States. American advisors worked closely with Vietnamese troops, teaching them not only how to survive, but how to take the fight directly to the enemy. The training covered a broad spectrum from mastering jungle navigation and survival skills to learning advanced small unit tactics designed to outsmart and outmaneuver guerrilla fighters who had long exploited the terrain to their advantage. These units quickly adapted to the fluid nature of the conflict, understanding that traditional warfare tactics had little place against an enemy that struck from the shadows and vanished just as swiftly. Vietnamese Rangers learned to operate in small, highly mobile teams that could move silently through the jungle, gather intelligence, and launch sudden, precise attacks on Viet Cong bases and supply lines. Their ability to blend stealth with aggression made them a formidable force, disrupting enemy operations and denying the guerrillas safe havens. The integration of modern weaponry into their arsenal was a game changer, with access to American firearms, explosives, and communication equipment. Vietnamese Special Forces could coordinate complex operations with unprecedented efficiency. This technological edge allowed them to call in air support, artillery strikes, and rapid helicopter insertion, amplifying the impact of their ground missions. The combination of skillful ground tactics and superior firepower shifted the balance in many engagements, putting pressure on the Viet Cong's ability to operate freely. One of the defining features of these forces was their adaptability. The jungle was an unforgiving environment, with thick foliage, treacherous terrain, and unpredictable weather. The Rangers and Special Forces trained relentlessly to endure these hardships, building stamina and mental toughness to carry out missions that could last days without rest or reliable supply lines. Their training emphasized teamwork, communication, and quick decision-making qualities essential when facing an enemy that could appear from anywhere. Using guerrilla tactics honed over years of resistance. Beyond the battlefield, These elite units played a vital role in intelligence gathering and reconnaissance. Their missions often involved probing deep into enemy territory to locate Viet Cong strongholds, tunnel networks, and supply caches. This information was crucial in planning larger operations and air strikes, enabling coordinated efforts to dismantle the insurgency's infrastructure. The Rangers' skill in reconnaissance meant they could anticipate enemy movements and set effective ambushes, turning the Viet Cong's own tactics against them. American advisors were integral in shaping these capabilities, providing continuous training, tactical advice, and support during missions. Their experience in counterinsurgency and jungle warfare proved invaluable, especially in teaching the Vietnamese how to use their equipment to maximum effect and how to adapt traditional military doctrines to the unique challenges of the Vietnam War. However, the advisors never overshadowed the Vietnamese troops. Instead, they worked as partners, recognizing that true success depended on empowering local forces to operate independently and effectively. The psychological resilience of the Vietnamese Rangers and Special Forces cannot be overstated. Facing an enemy that was not only skilled in combat but deeply embedded within local populations meant that every operation was fraught with uncertainty and danger. They had to navigate a complex environment where friend and foe could be indistinguishable, where booby traps and ambushes awaited around every bend, and where the physical and mental toll of jungle warfare weighed heavily. Yet, their training and discipline enabled them to persevere, maintaining focus and determination in the face of relentless adversity. These forces also carried the burden of protecting civilians and winning their trust, a crucial aspect of the broader counterinsurgency strategy. Their operations were often conducted in tandem with civic action programs that sought to build relationships with villagers, provide security, and to diminish the influence of the Viet Cong. The Rangers and Special Forces understood that military success alone would not end the conflict. Gaining the support of the people was equally essential. This dual role required them to balance combat readiness with a nuanced approach to interacting with local communities. The impact of their efforts was felt across many regions of Vietnam, from jungle-covered highlands to the intricate waterways of the Mekong Delta. These units adapted their tactics to diverse environments. They conducted daring raids on enemy encampments, disrupted supply routes, and hunted down guerrilla leaders, steadily eroding the Viet Cong's operational capabilities. Their successes bolstered morale among South Vietnamese forces and demonstrated the effectiveness of combining local knowledge with modern military practices. Despite the immense challenges, the Vietnamese Rangers and Special Forces earned a reputation for courage, skill, and determination. Their training, forged in partnership with American advisors, transformed them into an elite fighting force capable of meeting the unique demands of the Vietnam War. Through their actions, they embodied the hope that Vietnam could defend itself against insurgency and lay the groundwork for lasting peace. This chapter in the war's history highlights the importance of adaptability, innovation, and collaboration in modern warfare. It reminds us that success in such conflicts depends not only on superior firepower, but also on the ability to understand and respond to the complex realities on the ground. The Vietnamese Rangers and Special Forces stand as a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of soldiers who faced one of the most challenging combat environments in history and rose to meet the challenge with unwavering resolve. The introduction of helicopters and riverine forces into the conflict transformed the way Vietnamese and their allies could respond to threats, especially in the labyrinthine waterways and marshlands of the Mekong Delta. In a region where roads often dissolved into mud during the rains, and where canals and rivers were the lifelines connecting scattered communities. Mobility was not just an advantage, it was the difference between catching an enemy force or hearing about them only after they had vanished into the swamps. Helicopters, sleek and relentless in their rhythm, allowed troops to move from one hotspot to another in minutes, bypassing the need for dangerous and time-consuming overland travel. They could insert small, specialized units directly into the heart of contested areas, hovering low over rice paddies and landing in tight clearings before disappearing just as quickly. Carrying reinforcements, supplies, or sometimes evacuees. This speed and flexibility became a lifeline for remote outposts that might otherwise have been cut off during attacks or ambushes. Riverine forces, operating from shallow draft boats equipped with weapons and radios, became the guardians of the waterways. They patrolled canals that wound like serpents through the delta, searching for signs of enemy movement, ferrying troops to where they were most needed, and ensuring that vital supply routes remained open. These boats could nose into villages perched on stilts above the water, bringing not just soldiers but also medicine, food, and news from the outside world for the people living along the riverbanks. The arrival of these forces could be a mixture of reassurance and tension, for their presence meant both protection and the possibility of drawing enemy attention. Still, in many cases, the sight of the river patrols signaled that someone was watching over them, that the government's reach extended even into these remote, watery corners. The synergy between helicopters and river units was perhaps the most striking development. A sudden report from a patrol boat spotting enemy movement could trigger a helicopter deployment within minutes, creating a hammer and anvil effect where the enemy found themselves pressed between ground forces arriving by water and others dropping from the sky. This coordination required precise communication and trust between units that operated in completely different environments. But when it worked, it could trap guerrilla fighters who relied on the delta's maze-like geography to escape. The terrain that had once been their greatest shield became, in the right circumstances, a trap. For the soldiers on the ground, the arrival of a helicopter was more than a tactical shift, it was often a morale boost. The whoomp-whoomp of rotor blades cutting through the humid air could mean reinforcements were on their way, or that they would soon be lifted out of danger. It was a reminder that they were not alone, that even in the most remote corners of the delta, help could reach them in minutes. Pilots often flew under dangerous conditions, skimming treetops and exposing themselves to enemy fire to land where their comrades needed them most. Their skill and courage became legendary among the troops who relied on them. The delta's waterways, on the other hand, tested the endurance of riverine crews. The heat was oppressive, the humidity constant, and the water teemed with hazards floating debris. Hidden sandbars, and sometimes mines, enemy fighters used the waterways as both transportation and concealment, slipping through reed-lined channels in small boats or simply wading through shallow marshes. The patrols required patience and sharp eyes, scanning for ripples or movements that might betray an ambush. Even with armored hulls, the riverboats were vulnerable in narrow canals where overhanging vegetation could conceal a sudden attack. Yet the crews persisted, their presence making it harder for enemy forces to move freely. Beyond the military advantage, these mobility tools played a role in the larger strategy of building connections with local populations. A helicopter could deliver not just soldiers, but also doctors, engineers, and supplies for civic projects. Riverine units often doubled as transport for relief teams after storms or flooding, helping villagers repair homes or providing clean water. These moments, when the same craft that carried armed soldiers also brought aid, blurred the lines between war and peace, showing that the government's reach was not solely about force but also about support. This dual role helped counter the narrative spread by the guerrillas that the state was distant or indifferent. Over time, the constant presence of these mobile forces reshaped the rhythm of life in the delta. Villagers learned to recognize the sound of approaching rotors or the hum of boat engines, sometimes pausing work in the fields to watch as troops stepped onto the banks or into the paddies. While the war's presence was inescapable, these visits also brought moments of human interaction, shared meals, brief conversations, even small acts of kindness like soldiers helping repair a fishing net. These encounters, however fleeting, built threads of familiarity between soldiers and civilians, which in turn fed into the broader effort to win trust and cooperation. In the long run, the combined mobility of helicopters and riverine forces became an enduring symbol of adaptability in the face of difficult terrain. The enemy could fade into the jungle or slip through a canal under the cover of night. But the knowledge that they could be pursued swiftly from both air and water changed the psychological balance of the fight. It meant that no stronghold was entirely safe, no retreat entirely certain. And for the Vietnamese troops and their allies, it reinforced the belief that with the right tools and coordination, even the most elusive adversary could be found, engaged, and overcome, no matter how challenging the ground beneath their feet or the waters that surrounded them. The men who ventured into the heart of Vietnam's most unforgiving landscapes carried with them not just weapons and supplies, but a determination forged in the knowledge that each step could be their last. The jungle was not a simple collection of trees and vines. It was a living, breathing obstacle that swallowed the sun, muffled sound, and concealed both friend and foe. Every movement through the dense canopy was slow and deliberate, as the thick undergrowth snagged on uniforms and gear, making even the simplest journey a test of endurance. Beneath their boots, the ground could shift from firm earth to knee-deep mud in seconds, especially in the swampy lowlands where the humid air clung to them like a second skin. Here, every breath was heavy, every task made more difficult by the weight of the environment itself. The soldiers quickly learned that this was not just a battle against an opposing force, but also against nature itself. In the Mekong Delta, rivers became highways and barriers all at once, forcing troops to adapt to a world where boats and amphibious craft were as important as trucks and jeeps. The heat could sap strength as quickly as a firefight, while sudden downpours could turn clear paths into slick, treacherous trails. In the jungle's shadow, vision was limited, and the enemy had the advantage of home ground. They knew the terrain intimately, using it to move unseen, to disappear like smoke after striking. Tunnels added another dimension to the fight. Hidden just beneath the surface, these labyrinths served as living quarters, supply routes, and escape passages for those who knew them. For the soldiers trying to root out their adversaries, they were dark, claustrophobic worlds where the line between survival and disaster was as thin as the air inside. Every entrance had to be approached with caution. Every corner could conceal a hidden danger. Venturing underground was an act of both bravery and necessity, as intelligence gathered there could mean the difference between success and failure in the days ahead. Booby traps were a constant reminder that the enemy did not need to be visible to be deadly. A single misstep could trigger a concealed device, and the psychological toll of moving through such uncertainty weighed heavily on every man in the field. They learned to read the ground like a book, scanning for unnatural patterns, disturbed soil, or the faintest sign that danger lay just ahead. Every patrol was a gamble, each footstep a wager against unseen threats. The knowledge that harm could come from anywhere at any time bred a deep vigilance, one that often lingered long after soldiers returned from the field. Ambushes were a fear that never left their minds. The enemy struck suddenly, often from multiple directions, blending the sounds of gunfire with the cries of the wounded and the chaos of battle. In these moments, training and instinct took over. Units that survived did so because they moved as one, each man relying on the other without hesitation. Teamwork was not an abstract idea, it was a necessity as real as food, water, and ammunition. In the field, bonds formed under fire were stronger than any forged in the comfort of peacetime. Resilience became the invisible armor they all wore. It was the will to keep going despite exhaustion, to press forward even when the outcome was uncertain. They learned to find small victories, securing a village, crossing a river without incident, completing a mission without loss, and to draw strength from them. The hardships bound them together, turning strangers into brothers whose survival depended on shared courage. Over time, they became adept not only at enduring the harsh realities of Vietnam's landscape, but also at using them to their advantage. They learned the rhythms of the jungle, the signs of an impending ambush, and the subtle ways the environment could both protect and endanger them. In a war where the lines between safety and peril were blurred, their greatest weapon was not always their rifle, but their ability to adapt, endure, and stand shoulder to shoulder against whatever lay ahead. And so, in the face of swamps that swallowed men whole, tunnels that hid unseen dangers, traps set with patient malice, and ambushes that could erupt without warning, the soldiers pressed on. Every day in the field was a testament to their resilience, their teamwork, and their refusal to let the land or the enemy break them. In the unforgiving theater of Vietnam, survival was never a given, it was earned, one cautious step and one hard-fought mission at a time. As the months turned into years, the blend of determination in the field and compassion in the villages began to leave its mark. Soldiers did not just march into communities with rifles and helmets. They brought food, medicines, and hope. Roads were repaired. Schools stood where there had once been only dust, and the faces of children began to brighten at the sight of a uniform, not out of fear, but with recognition of protection. This dual approach, meeting danger head-on while also extending a hand, slowly began to loosen the grip that the Viet Cong held over many rural hearts and minds. The military operations remained relentless. Patrols continued to push back against guerrilla positions, securing key routes and disrupting enemy movements. Yet the victories were not always measured by terrain gained or enemies defeated. Sometimes they were measured by the simple sight of villagers returning to their fields without fear, or market stalls filling once again with produce and laughter. It was in these moments that the true success of the combined military and civic efforts could be felt, not in statistics, but in the subtle restoration of normal life. In places where suspicion had once been as thick as the jungle canopy, trust began to take root. Families who had once whispered in guarded tones now spoke more freely. Village elders, once cautious of any outside presence, began to engage with government representatives, suggesting improvements and voicing concerns. These were small steps, but in a war defined by uncertainty, each step forward mattered. The men and women involved knew that this progress was fragile. A single act of violence could undo weeks of effort. A failed promise could close the door that had only just begun to open. But through consistency and respect, many communities started to believe that their future might not be dictated by fear alone. South Vietnam's defense grew stronger, not just because of better trained forces, more effective tactics, or superior mobility, but because of the growing partnership between soldiers and civilians. The villagers were no longer just bystanders, they were participants in securing their own peace. The more they saw their lives improve, the less sway the Viet Cong's message held over them. It was never an easy road, and the challenges never fully disappeared. But in those moments when the sun set over a quiet hamlet, where children played in the dust and elders sipped tea outside their homes, there was a glimpse of what all the effort was for a South Vietnam that could stand on its own, free from constant threat, and shaped by the will of its own people. And so, as we close this chapter of the story, we remember that history is never just about battles and strategies, it is about people. It is about those who fought, those who endured, and those who dreamed of something better. Thank you for joining us on this journey through a complex and often overlooked chapter of the Vietnam War. If you found this story insightful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who might appreciate learning about this part of history. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that go beyond the headlines, shedding light on the human experiences behind the events. And now, wherever you are in the world, I wish you a peaceful night. Sleep well, and we will see you in the next story.